On guys, welcome back, and due to the majority of the votes on my recent poll for my next essay being overwhelmingly in favor of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 essay or like discussion video, I decided that I would do that today. And I have kind of a weird unpopular opinion where I actually prefer the Amazing Spider-Man 2 to the first film. Something about it just strikes a chord more so with me than the first one did, and tonally I feel like it works better. Now, I did do a video like a couple years ago on this movie already, but I feel like nowadays I can articulate myself better than I used to be able to, so I wanted to do a remaster sort of thing. Although I'm going to be touching on different points, I'm not going to retread a lot of stuff that I said in that video. I stand by a lot of what I said. In this film, Andrew Garfield does a really good job capturing a experienced Peter Parker as Spider-Man. You know, he does a good job of filling the shoes of someone who's been doing this for a while and is so used to it and just has so much fun being this person, and just, you know, saving people brings him joy, basically. I feel like he captures that really well. And I feel like the suit is great. I think the effects are possibly the best of any Spider-Man movie. The action scenes are great. They might be some of the best of any Spider-Man movie. There's some really creative stuff with Electro in particular. However, it is kind of CG heavy, and I do have a little bit more respect for when they're able to capture things practically, which is why I still have a soft spot for the train fight from Spider-Man 2, because they did a lot of that practically from what I recall. So there is that element to it. But yeah, like the acting as well, I think is great. And something else that not a lot of people talk about is the score by Hans Zimmer is probably the most underrated Spider-Man score. Like, it's not my favorite, I don't think. I like a lot of what Danny Elfman did with the original ones, especially what Christopher Young did with the third film. And I like Michael Giacchino's score for the Tom Holland MCU movies, or Spider-Man movies. But something about Hans Zimmer's score for this movie is just very exciting. It might be the most, like, exciting, I don't know, energetic score. It fits the movie really well. The theme is very repetitive. Spider-Man's in particular, as well as Electro's and I guess the Green Goblin's theme as well, but they're ever present, so you never really forget about them, which makes them very memorable. And I don't know, I just think the music's great in this movie. I know I've seen some people who don't like it, like, but I think they did some really creative stuff, especially having Pharrell Williams do, I believe, like, lines of dialogue during Electro's theme to emulate his inner thoughts and how mentally unstable his character is. So I think there's a lot of creativity done through the score. I think it's a really excellent musical score. And I think the movie is just really underrated. Like, it's weird how much just undying hatred there is for this movie. And I don't mean just, like, distaste, like, you know, how people kind of shrug off forgettable Marvel movies nowadays. And they're like, oh, that one was okay, forget about it in, like, 2 days. It's not like that. It's just this undying hatred, unwavering, just complete hatred. I've seen people rip this movie to shreds. And while I don't believe it's a perfect film, I do think it's really solid. And I can see myself rewatching this one more than the first one. The first one, maybe it's a better movie, I don't know, but I can't really see myself rewatching that movie a lot, because at the end of the day, it's kind of just a similar retread of the same Spider-Man story we've seen before. But, you know, with some different elements being played around with. But I feel like in this movie, kind of, despite how messy it can be, I feel like all the plot elements kind of work together a little better, and there are things that are a lot more clear. And, you know, there are themes and metaphors in the first film that are a bit more subtle. And I feel like in this one, they're a little bit more kind of obvious, like up in your face. Like, the kind of the main theme of the movie is like time and, you know, how you spend that time, right? And it's very obvious. It's present throughout the entire film. The film starts with the shot of the inner cogs, like the inner workings of a watch. and then it ends in a clock tower. And, Gwen has her whole speech about how time is precious and life is precious because it ends, and don't waste your time living someone else's life. And it's a very obvious theme. It's kind of like, it's very up in your face, I suppose, but I don't know. I kind of just, I dig, just obvious themes. I don't know. I think it's well done. I think the themes and, like, the emotions in this movie are really felt. Now, that doesn't mean I think all of it is perfect. I think that the Green Goblin element with Dane DeHaan and all that, with Harry Osborn, it's not very good. There are just countless problems with the writing in that department, in that part of the film, regarding how it was set up in the first film that Norman Osborn was dying, and that's what Irfan Khan wanted to do with the Kurt Connors research, right? But in this one, he just dies at the beginning and then tells Harry that he now has the goblin disease or something, and that he got the handshakes or something the same time that he did when he was young or something. And it's like this undying curse that just is upon their family, basically. And what's just weird to me is, like, so why is Harry dying now? Like, I've seen people talking about this, how they could have solved this issue with the writing by simply having a different line of dialogue, like having Norman say, "You have the shaky hands, you got them earlier than I did," or something like that, to imply that it's more urgent in Harry, or that he has some different, more fast infecting version of this disease or something. I don't know. They don't do that, though. It doesn't make any sense why his dad lived for like 60 years or something and has only now died, but Harry has it too, and he's like dying. They could have played up the idea that because he wants to, like it's kind of like a similar thing to Star Wars, like Anakin ends up turning to the dark side by trying to save his wife or whatever. You could have it be like Harry ends up speeding up the process of the disease by trying to combat the disease or something. But they never really do that. It's just kind of like this weird plot thread. And it's just, the way his character's introduced is super weird. Like, they just introduce him and you're just kind of meant to know who he is, even though there's been no prior context for who this character is. And then there's just a lot of cheesy stuff with him and Peter where they, like, reunite and they imply that they've been friends in the past, and they kind of, I don't know, it's very cheesy. I don't mind it necessarily, but that whole plot point is just really weird and doesn't make any sense in the movie. And then, like, at the end, he shows up to fight Peter, and he says this line of dialogue that makes no sense in the context of the film. He says, "When you said Spider-Man said no, you meant you said no." Which doesn't make any sense. It seems like there's some different version of the movie where Spider-Man or Peter doesn't show up to talk to Harry as Spider-Man, and rather gets back to Harry later saying that he talked to Spider-Man and that he said he wouldn't give him his blood. But in the context of the film, Spider-Man literally went to visit Harry personally, or Peter went to visit him as Spider-Man, and told him he couldn't give him his blood. So that line of dialogue literally makes no sense. It's like, wait, why are you mad at him about that? Like, that never happened. We never saw that happen. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. He says, "You don't give people hope, you take it away," which is like a theme or a thematic element that had been present throughout the film, because Peter had talked to him earlier about how Spider-Man gives people hope. And then towards the middle, he says, "I think you're right about him giving people hope." And then at the end, he's like, "No, you don't give people hope, you take it away." I don't mind that, but just that line of dialogue doesn't make a lot of sense. And then it just feels really lazy, because following that, at the very end, they just have Hat Guy from the post-credit scene of the first film walk in to visit him in prison, and then he's like, "You're looking better," and he's like, it comes and goes. Wait, what? Like, that's not how you write such a major plot element out of the story. You don't just say, it comes and goes. It's been this constant throughout the entire film of, no, Harry is literally dying. He's going to die any second. And now it just comes and goes. Like, come on, man. That's not how you write this. That's not how you... It's just a terribly written plot element. And Dane DeHaan, honestly, I don't feel like he's terrible. Like, I don't even mind the performance or the idea of him being in the movie. It's just the execution from beginning to end of that plot element is just so terrible. And as other people have pointed out, he basically just exists as kind of a catalyst to Gwen dying. So all the stuff with Green Goblin is just really bad. Just like, I'll agree in that department. And then in terms of Electro, the other main villain, I don't mind his establishment, his setup. He's an unstable, like, kind of character who's a little bit of an outcast, right? Even in a deleted scene, his mom freaking hates him. And, you know, he's mistreated and misunderstood. And Spider-Man makes him feel important. And then later on, when one of the police officers ends up shooting at him in Times Square, and the people start picking on him, calling him names, and just generally mistreating him and being assholes to him, and then he believes Spider-Man set him up. I don't mind that, and I don't mind that that's what makes him turn on Spider-Man, is that he thinks that he just used him to gain attention. I don't mind that either, and I don't mind the fact that that's why he turns on the people as well. What I find weird is that he just gets locked up in this prison for a majority of the movie, and then comes back at the end, and then Spider-Man just shows up and frickin' murders him. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't feel like Spider-Man. Like, I feel like what they should have done is something like I understand there could have been kind of a metaphor there in the fact that people who are mistreated, people who are different, they don't always get justice, But at the same time, it just felt like, he kind of went nuts, and Spider-Man shows up, and he just, kills him, he blows him to bits. And that doesn't really feel like that's how the story should have ended, right? It feels like Peter maybe should have shown up and tried to just talk him down and reason with him, because earlier on he says he just has so much rage stored up inside him. And, Peter says, I know you don't want to hurt anyone. So I feel like he should have just tried to talk to Electro or something, or talk to Max, rather than just go in with the intention of fighting him. There's just kind of no real emotion there in that fight. It feels like there should have been more emotion. It feels like maybe, they play a sad rendition of Max's theme when he dies, and it feels like there'd be more emotion there if it was Peter tried to talk him down, he tried to stop him, but at the end of the day, he wasn't going to stop. Gwen was in danger, and Peter had to make a tough decision, right? But it feels like there's no real tough decision about it. He's just like, we're gonna overload him and kill him, and it just feels kind of weird how okay Peter is with doing that, and how okay Gwen is with doing that as well, considering the fact that they know this guy, kind of, and they know that he's not, completely stable, So I understand that maybe there was meant to be a thematic element of, how people don't always get their justice at the end of the day, but I feel like it could have been executed differently. Maybe have Peter interact with him a couple times throughout the runtime. If you'd cut out Harry entirely, you could have kept it to just be Electro as the main antagonist, and then you could have him and Peter interact at multiple points throughout the film, and have Peter tried to reason with him and talk him down, and then eventually it's just, there's no stopping him, right? He's not going to stop. So I just feel like there wasn't a lot of build-up there in that department, and if they had cut out Harry, they could have taken more time to build up Electro and, what was going on with him in particular. And, The other thing that I've seen people complain about is the whole plot line with Peter's parents. The film starts on a sequence with them on a plane, basically, trying to get away from Osborn and to protect Peter, and his mom dies, and then it seems like the plane crashes, and then the movie opens. And then later on, and throughout the whole sequence, Peter's dad is trying to download some sort of data. We find out later when Peter goes to the abandoned subway that, you know, that was the recording or whatever that he left, that he downloaded into the system of the tram car or the train or whatever, which is okay. Like, I don't mind that. But what kind of bothers me is that there's a deleted scene where Peter's father shows up at Gwen's grave at the end, which is actually extremely emotional, and that I feel they should have kept in, but I feel like I understand why they cut it out, because the way they left it on that opening scene is so heavily implied that they both died in some sort of plane crash. So it just feels weird that he would show up there. I mean, I've seen people like argue or debate that that wasn't actually him and it was Peter imagining his father or something like that. But I feel like it would have been more emotional if it really was his father who visited him at Gwen's grave. Yet again, we wouldn't have Peter listening to Gwen's recorded message, which would kind of suck because that's a really great speech. But I don't know. It's kind of like whatever you prefer, because in that scene, his father does say, with great power comes great responsibility. But I feel like if they'd cut out that opening scene and just started on Spider-Man swinging through the city, then having his father appear at the end wouldn't seem as unfounded. If they hadn't shown the plane literally freaking with the windows blown out and like just descending, like about to crash into the ground, I feel like that would have been better. And then I've also seen people debating about the fact that saying that Richard Parker's blood being the DNA or whatever that was mixed with the spiders undercuts the whole message of the fact that anyone can be Spider-Man, right? And that only with his bloodline can Spider-Man be a thing. Well, number one, it doesn't bother me necessarily because there are other stories where that's present, and I feel like they were just trying to do something different with it, which I respect. Number two, it doesn't ruin the with great power comes great responsibility message because of the fact that Peter could have this whole aspect of, destined to become Spider-Man, destined to protect the world, but he chooses not to, right? But he still chooses to do so. So I don't get that part of it. Like, the with great power comes great responsibility aspect is still present there, whether or not it's his father's blood or whether he could have just gotten bitten randomly, It's not like Peter had to become Spider-Man, but he chooses to. And that's what the whole message of Spider-Man is, right? So that doesn't bother me at all, really. But I can understand why some people are bothered by it. Personally, I'm just not, and I appreciate that they took a different creative direction by exploring the backstory with Peter's parents and all that. And other than that, I just like the movie a lot. There are so many scenes that I feel work really well. There's scenes with Aunt May and Peter. I feel like, once again, I mentioned this in the first, my recent video on the first Amazing Spider-Man. I feel like Aunt May in this series is the best Aunt May. There are scenes with her and Peter in this film that genuinely brought me to tears, that I feel are some of the best, scenes with those two characters. And the scenes with Peter and Gwen are really excellent as well, and it genuinely feels like they did a good job carrying over the narrative from the first film to the second film. That's my problem with the Tom Holland movies, is that it feels like they cut short plot lines from the first film to the second film. With this one, the whole theme of, Captain Stacy asking, Peter to stay away from Gwen, and, that carries into this film. It's, throughout the entire film. It's the backbone of it. and there are just scenes where Peter's in like the middle of danger and Gwen's nearby or something like that, and he's thinking about Gwen, and then he just thinks that he sees her father, right? And I think that's really cool, and I like that there's like Peter says something before the final battle, like, I'm just gonna follow you everywhere you go, right? And then in Gwen's speech, she says, don't spend your life living someone else's life. And it's almost like because they were so closely connected and because they were basically living each other's lives, that's why she died, right? So there's like, that even connects to her speech, right? I think that's great. I think that's really, really great. And, you know, their acting, their chemistry, Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield, just fantastic. Once again, like I said, Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy is probably my favorite love interest character in all of the Spider-Man movies. She feels genuinely involved and has a part to play. Despite the fact that she dies at the end, Peter wouldn't have been able to take down Electro without her. She was an important part, or she had an important part to play there, and I like that she doesn't just die in a stupid way or anything like that. Like, she died knowing that Peter tried to save her, and she died knowing that she had helped him, you know, that, like, that's probably the way that she would have wanted to go out, not in some, you know, stupid way. Like, she made the decision to be there. She says that before the battle with Electro, you know, this is my choice, you know, and then I like that they talk about that, you know, the fact that it's not really Gwen's father's choice to make them not be together or whatever, right? And there's always that theme of choice, right? Which I really enjoy in all these movies. But I like that, you know, that Peter chooses to be Spider-Man, and then someone else gives him just a really hard decision, you know, like, oh, should I be with the person that I love, or should I protect them, or, you know, stay away from them to protect them? But then Gwen makes her decision, right, to be with Spider-Man, to accept the dangers of being in a relationship with him, and ultimately dies at the end. It's really tragic, and it actually touches on the element of the fact that Spider-Man can't save everyone. There are very few films that really touch on that. They touch on that in the Spider-Verse, but other than that, I can't think of a lot of Spider-Man movies where the love interest dies like that. And I know that, like, it happens in the comic books and stuff, and it's very heavily foreshadowed throughout the film, and even from the end of the first film, but it really is a huge dramatic beat, and is one of the biggest losses that Spider-Man has had in all of these films. And I think it's just, people who complain about this film need to actually think about the fact that it has stakes in it. It's not like the modern Marvel movies or MCU movies, right, where, okay, someone dies, they can always come back by time travel or the Infinity Stones or some other bullcrap, or they can just be some different multiverse version of the same character, right? But with this, it's like, no, Gwen actually dies, and it's really heartbreaking because of the fact that we know she was going places. She was going to go to Oxford, and it's just, even the way she dies is way more brutal than you'd think. She hits her head on the pavement, like, and it's really sad because it's like Peter blames himself for it. It's like he caught her, but he was just too late, you know? He didn't have anything to grip onto until the metal bar, but by that time he caught her, but it was the general act of saving her which killed her, right? Because it was the whiplash of catching her that made her hit her head. And it's just so brutal. Like, you know, The Dark Knight. Let's think about The Dark Knight. Rachel Dawes dies in The Dark Knight. And that's brutal too. But she dies in an off-screen explosion. In this movie, you literally see Gwen freaking slam her head on the pavement. It's one of the most brutal deaths I've seen here, and because you care so much about that character, it's so upsetting. And Andrew Garfield's acting in that scene, and then towards the end as well, is just perfect. I think he's so great. In this film especially, even more so than the first one. And then you get into that final scene, which I know a lot of people don't like, the whole Rhino kind of shoved in element where he just kind of shows up at the end and is like shooting at everybody or whatever, and he's like, I am the Rhino. But like, I love that Peter listening to Gwen's speech is what motivates him, right? And she says, we need to be greater than what we suffer, I think is a line. Like, that whole speech is just so powerful, I feel. And I find the ending of this movie just really uplifting. I know people don't like it, but I find it uplifting. I feel like it would have been disappointing to end it on a different note. Like, the score that plays there, and then the kid that Peter helped earlier in the film. Like, there are people that complain about this movie, but when I watch that scene with the kid just walking out, standing in front of the frickin' tank guy with guns and missiles and all this crap, and then Spider-Man just shows up and he says, you're the bravest kid I've ever seen. Thanks for sticking up for me, right? Or thanks for, standing up for me. And it's just like, it's just so powerful. Like, that, when I see that, I'm like, that is Spider-Man. That's what Spider-Man is. Not everything understands that. Just that, the impact that he can have on people. Just this kid walking out wearing a Spider-Man costume, standing up to the freaking villain. And, that's the impact that Spider-Man has. That is Spider-Man. And then having him come to the rescue and, fight the Rhino, and just kind of the uplifting sense that it leaves you on, there's no place like home. I love that ending. I don't know. I know people don't like that they it's kind of a fault of the marketing, the fact that they heavily implied that he was going to fight the Rhino, and they put him on all the posters and stuff, and that he's not even in the movie for 5 minutes. I can understand that, but in the context of the movie, I think it works fine, and I think that's a very good, uplifting note to end the film on. It's just, I always love that, no matter what, you still, you can stand back up, no matter what happens. Like, they have that in Spider-Verse too, right, is that no matter how many times you get hit, you always get back up. And I love that that's what happens at the end, that Peter still gets back up and he takes up the responsibility of being Spider-Man despite everything that's happened. And I love that. Spider-Man 3 is my favorite Spider-Man movie because I love that it shows how Spider-Man is not a completely infallible individual, that he has flaws and that he can make huge mistakes, like hurting his best friend, hurting his, the person that he loves most, MJ, I love that they show Spider-Man really go to a dark place in Spider-Man 3, but I love that they show the amount of loss that Spider-Man can go through and still get back up in this film. And I really like this movie a lot. It's not my favorite Spider-Man movie, and I think it has plenty of problems. As I've stated, I feel like too many elements. Some of them needed to be cut out. I think Green Goblin could have been cut out entirely, if not executed differently. And, I feel like Electro could have been given a better resolution, but it feels like they were limited in terms of time. So instead of having a different ending to Electro's character, they just blew him up because they had to shove in Green Goblin at the last second for a 2-minute fight scene to kill Gwen Stacy off. That was bad. The Green Goblin element is terrible. And there are a lot of different plot elements, but I feel like I don't mind the exploration of Peter's parents. I feel like that adds to the story. It's a different, unique, creative direction. And this movie just has a soul. It has heart. It has those moments that make me feel happy, and they're just wholesome moments. And when I see those, I go, that is Spider-Man. And you don't get a lot of those anymore. Like, Spider-Man Far From Home doesn't really have anything like that for me, because it's just like kind of starting to get boring, part of the MCU template, right? And that's what I mean, is like, people hate on this movie so much, but I prefer it to a majority of MCU movies, like from recent years, for the last little while, because they all start to feel samey. They don't have heart and soul. They're just products, But this film had heart, it had soul, And I'll take a messy movie that has heart and soul above a competently structured product placement, corporate product. I don't know how to describe it, right? But all these Marvel movies now feel like corporate products. And this one feels like it can feel like that at points. It feels like the studio restricted them heavily, but tonally I think it's really fun. I feel like it's more rewatchable than the first one. And I feel like it just hits, it hits harder. And from what I gather, I'm not the only one who feels that way, but I think this movie is just so underrated. I think it has so many great elements to it. And it has heart, it has soul, and it is messy. It's not a perfect movie, but I think it is a good one. I think it's a solid one, and it has heart, which I value in a movie. I've said this before. I said this in my recent videos on the first film, is that if a film works on an emotional level for me, that's what I base everything else on. If I like the movie on that level, if it works on that level for me. If a film doesn't work on an emotional level, everything that happens feels empty. In this film, it works on an emotional level. It has heart, it has soul. So everything that happens, even the messy elements, I can enjoy. I can feel the emotions they were trying to go for. When a film doesn't work on an emotional level, like Endgame, whenever they try to go for an emotional moment in a movie like that, it falls completely flat and I feel nothing, and I can't rewatch it. But if I want to feel uplifted by a movie, I can rewatch The Amazing Spider-Man 2, because that's what it does. I honestly feel like it's an inspiring, uplifting movie, and we need more of those. And I feel like, Amazing Spider-Man 1 isn't bad, but I can't see myself really rewatching that one if I want to feel like uplifted or something. It's not really like a fun watch. It's kind of drab and gray, and this film's just like colorful and lively, and it's also just, it has soul, it has heart. And I keep saying that, but it feels like that is so uncommon nowadays in Marvel or even just superhero movies and shows in general, So, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think, is super underrated. I've talked about all the elements that I feel were important to be talked about. I did make a video a couple years ago where I talked about some things that I briefly touched on in this video, so you can go watch that if you would like to, but yeah, that's pretty much it for my thoughts on The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I think it is honestly just a wonderful movie. I think it's really underappreciated, and it's good. I think it's good. So, yeah. You guys, please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Do you agree with me? Do you think it's underrated? Do you prefer it to the first film? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And, of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.